Hi, my name is Benedict. Welcome to the third video, that's number three fingers, in my series on sounds in a mix. Now, I think some people think that this is going to be a series on turn this knob here, turn that knob there, and you'll be making whatever the current banging sound is. Nope, there's billions of those sort of tutorials on the internet already. If that's exactly what you're after and you think that's going to solve your problem, great, go for it. My suggestion is that it probably isn't the solution. Because A, you're copying somebody else's sound. How are you going to be unique if you copy somebody else's sound? All you're going to do is manage to sound like them. But if you've got a unique sound and then somebody's copying you, you're kind of going like, well, why don't I just go to the source? So perhaps look at the thinking behind it. Now, I know that thinking kind of hurts and we all go, I don't want to do it. But the really smart people, the people who achieve amazing things, whether they realize it or not, they've actually put the thinking in. Let's say the Taj Mahal. We all know that building in India with the spires and the dome on top. Someone designed that. It may or may not have been the king who commissioned it. He might have just offed the guy and his whole family so that no one could ever say that anybody but him didn't do it. Doesn't matter. Someone designed that. Do you think it would be possible to build the Taj Mahal by just tossing bricks in a pile? No. So by all means, go out there and learn techniques. Learn specific techniques that allows you to make these kinds of sounds. The ones that do this. And then on top of that, tend to do the kind of stuff as well. Really interesting stuff to learn. It's fascinating. Not my cup of meat. But you can learn it. But just learning how to make that sound does not mean that you know how to use it. Now, whilst I'm on this sound, let's have a look at something interesting about this sound. This sound is referred to as a bass sound. Remember from our bass tutorial? We talked about the role of a bass. Now, before you use any sound, before you make any sound, you have to think, well, what is its role? What's it here to do? Just like in Star Wars, Darth Vader is there to be a center point for tyranny. That's why he is what he is, and sonically he's got the whole ba 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 ba. That's his role in that story. Any sound you put into your mix has to have a role in that story. So what's its role? The more you understand its role, the more you can control it. Because if we had Darth Vader who was out picking flowers in the forest, he wouldn't really be Darth Vader. He'd be, I don't know, Kylo Ren or someone. So, role. This is given the role of bass. Is that a bass sound? My argument it is not, absolutely not. Musically, because a bass sound underpins a musical structure. And when used, those sounds don't actually underpin a musical structure. Also, traditionally, a bass sound, because it's underpinning a musical structure, doesn't have a big sonic footprint. It might have a fat sonic footprint. It might be big, but it doesn't have a broad sonic footprint. Look at this fella. There's bass down there, but what's this? It's actually taken the whole sonic spectrum. So my argument is not to say that whether those sounds are evil or not. Some of them are just fascinating and amazing and incredibly powerful. But I call them leads. They're a lead sound because they dominate the mix. So if you were one of those people who was a tad shitey with me when I suggested that they weren't bass sounds, they're lead sounds because they dominate the mix. They lead what you want the listener to hear, feel, do. And once you understand that, then you can mix them differently. Rather than focusing on trying to make them do lots here, they're really doing all their stuff up here. That's an impressively ghastly sound. Thanks Factory Sound Bank. Agony if you're looking for it. Get him out of the way now. Now let's look at lead sounds. What are the lead sounds there to do? You already have the answer. They are there to lead the mix, to lead the storytelling. Again, I'm going to say to you, if you don't have a story, you shouldn't be writing anything. Here's a story. Doesn't matter whether you like that or not, but that is a story. It starts somewhere, it goes somewhere, it does a little bit of this, and it goes home. I hear a lot of stuff in particularly EDM and other things around it. I call EDM absolutely everything. Retro, wave, what have you. It's all EDM. They pretend that they're in a different genre, but no, they're not. They're in a subgenre of EDM. So commonly you hear this. Are you bored yet? I sure am. Nothing wrong with this. It's a good call. Now we've got a response. We're building a story. We're building a conversation. Hey, Joe. Hi, Benedict. Got a call and response. So a lead, doesn't matter what the instrument looks or sounds like, its role is to lead the call and response, to lead the story in your piece. So this is we'll start to look now at how we might construct a sound. Now there's going to be a huge variety, just like anything you can have a huge variety and you can do what you want. But if you understand the mindset of what this is, you're going to find it much easier to create the right sound, the right feel, and the mix will get easy. Trying to mix that EDM web-based thingy is going to be a nightmare always, especially if you think it's a bass sound. You try and put anything on top of that, you're screwed. So, sound, very, very simple lead sound. Commonly a lead sound, and I've heard some people define lead sounds as being only monophonic. What a pile of bollocks. What an absolute pile of bollocks. Don't make up rules. So, that's a cool lead sound. What we're looking for is the ability to tell our story. That's a very synthy lead sound. At the moment, it's got no attack, no release, no envelope, no shaping. So in other words, we need to give it shaping. If we just play this, not super cool. If we do this, just with filter alone, hear how that, vaguely the same piece, because I can't remember anything, has suddenly developed more life. We've created some movement in the notes, the length of the notes, but we've also created movement, in this case in the filter, as we're opening and closing this filter. Let's also look at a few other things that we can do. Get that filter open a little bit, and amp attack. Backing off your attack, or adding attack, in other words, slowing down the time in which that sound speaks, can really change how that sound feels. I'm also going to turn off this monophonic thing. While a lot of instruments are truly monophonic, like if you're looking at a clarinet or an oboe or a trumpet, that thing's monophonic. You've got one tube, one bit of air flowing down it, one sound at a time. However, it doesn't entirely play that way. So I'll just speed this back up. Is not a natural playing style. It doesn't sound normal. It doesn't flow. That flows. It's the bit in between. A trumpet can't do that unless you've got many trumpets. And if you're playing samples, try to avoid doing that. Use one trumpet to do this and another to do that. I've told you this before, but I'll keep telling you. It's the bit in the middle where they transition. That is called legato. Doesn't matter how much you play around with it's never, oops, we went up instead of down. That sounds very synthy. Nothing wrong with that. Great if you're trying to sound synthy, but not good if you're not wanting to sound synthy, in which case understand the relationship. It's that little bit in between. The instrument can't actually play it. Not if it's a trumpet or something with a single line, a single polyphony. But by being in a polyphonic mode, allowing several notes, you can just slur them. And it's that slur and how the slur is played and emphasized that gives you a huge amount of control over how the sound behaves. Now remember, your lead is telling a story. Stories are all about nuance. In other words, it's the subtle, tiny little things that sit below the surface. You're watching this on a video, and most of you are probably physically watching the video as well, because you get extra information from me, not only in how I wave my hands around, but in the things that I do. Oh, he moved this here. Oh, look, when he played that, we could see over here, sorry, point with mouse, that did this to the sound. So we're adding in all that extra nuance, which makes video better than sound in certain situations. Not in all, though. So consider, if you don't want it to sound so synthy, then put it back into a polyphonic mode. You don't need many voices. Normally only two is plenty, because you're not looking to play chords with lead voices more often than not. You can, but often that's going into a different kind of instrument. That's a polyphonic instrument. A lead instrument can be polyphonic, no rules, but often what the listener is hearing is more monophonic. That's where people get the idea that lead instruments have to be monophonic. Bollocks. So we're looking for movement as well. What kind of movement is there depends entirely upon what kind of sound you're after. If I'm looking to create brass sound, my favorite of all sounds, I'm not going to just set filter envelope to a set place. I'm going to use my velocity to define how much that filter opens, the quack on the front. There, so that gives us a little bit more feel. We're also going to add a little bit of release here, because if you were playing a trumpet, fiddle and a fiddle, when you come to the end of that note, you don't just stop. You're not a robot. There is going to be a point at which you flow off the note. How you flow off the note is almost as important as how you flow onto it. If you have to make a choice, you've only got one controller that you can control how you flow onto the note more than how you flow off the note. Okay, so adding that little bit of extra action starts to increase the interest. A lot of people these days go straight to providing vast amounts of interest in things, which is like that, what we called a bass sound before. Huge amounts of interest. Trying to make one sound do our job for us. No, as composers, our job is to tell a story. If one sound is telling your whole story for you, brilliant. Well done, you got lucky. But it's also lazy if that's all you ever do, to find the biggest, hugest sounds you can ever do with lots of automated movement in it and say, I've read a piece of music. No, you didn't. You made a sound, you put the finger down, just like in the Dead Mouse masterclass thing, put a beat behind it, and then pretended you built something. That's the equivalent of trying to build the Taj Mahal by getting two motherfuckers of bricks, throwing them beside each other and going, look, building. No, it's two bricks lying on the ground. Be honest, then you can start to work on how to improve what you do. You can say, I might use a few smaller bricks, pile them on top of each other. Now I've got a tower of bricks. That's better than two motherfuckers of bricks lying on the ground randomly. And I know that's harsh, but if we want to improve our music, if we want to improve our ability to get an audience, then we need to consider that. So, a little bit of movement. A lot of real instruments, when you play them, they actually play sharp. Because when you hit that violin string, you're actually stretching it. Just like with a guitarist, when hand in shot, when he frets and stretches that note, it's like, he's actually pulling that note up. He's doing this. And when you play a sound, any sound that's in the real world, chances are it starts a wee bit sharp. That's not a bad thing. We can take advantage of that. By adding a little bit of that in. We don't want quite as much quackiness. Or we can slow. A million ways you can create your sound. FM's a favourite of mine in Subtractor. You can FM from one sound, one oscillator to another. Hasn't that just added so much to that sound? We've got one of them going a little sharp, the other one just be aware, you've probably noticed we've got this lump here. You're probably going to want a high pass filter to just chop that off. Matter of fact, I'll show you because it's annoying me. High pass filter. Because it's making a mess of the mix. So all of this that I'm trying to show you is how you can create a more interesting lead sound by subtlety. The next thing you've got, now these are fairly static movements, the next thing that you want to look at is how to create more subtle movement. And that's often in automation. In fact, I don't want to do that. We can create static movement by letting a sound fade away. That's a good win. Or we can do it by controlling the volume level. Let's just take control of this here. In headphones, that chorusing's annoying me. Let's just give this a little bit of LFO, because it's very flat. Hear how controlling and moving the volume slider of the instrument as the performance happens adds to the feel of the performance. It makes it come alive more. It adds emotiveness to that sound. It makes it seem more real. This is an absolutely key thing. Now, you don't need to be a great performer. I am not a great performer at all. I use my friend the mouse. Oh, mouse in short. To write most things. Put my notes in. I'll then start to look at creating legato overlaps. I will also look at creating filter movements rather than just automating my vibrato. I would probably have assigned vibrato to mod wheel or something, but anything you can just set, you can automate this little fella and just control it. So you zoom in on your musical phrase, not your whole piece, but your musical phrase. Musical phrase, zoom in on that, and then look at adjusting your brightness of your sound, your volume of your sound, and various other things like your attack time. Over that phrase. Because once you've got one lovely phrase, to a great extent you'll be copying that phrasing through large amounts of the piece. So you can be lazy and actually say, okay, I've created my main hook, if you will, my melodic hook, and you can then copy that across to variations of that. So here's one thing, here's a variation of that, because it's got the same structure. We've just moved it by a couple of semitones, kept it in key. Here's another variation of that. Same notes, different order. Or is another variation. With lead sounds, you're looking to use that sense of call and response that we had before. See, that's a variation that's creating a call and response. And we can control our volume of that as those notes play. We can change how quickly each of those notes appears. If you're doing that, just remember you've got to set your amp attack time before the note. Otherwise, it'll use the old value. So you can set your amp attack time. It can change over that time, as can your filter envelope amount. It can change over that time. So if we had a so you hear how that's altering that sound and creating more feel in the performance. Any of these things you can automate over your phrase, and then you look at doing that through all your sections, and you'll suddenly go, oh my God, that feels so much better. And here's the killer trick. Creating a big sounding piece is not in creating bigger sounds. It's in creating more engagement in the listener. The more emotion people can invest in your piece of music, book, painting, whatever it is you do, but your music, because this is what we're talking about here, the more people can invest emotions in your music, then the more engaged they will be about it, the more they will tell their friends and be like, okay. There's a lot of investment in Bohemian Rhapsody, and that's been perpetrated and added to over the years as various things have picked up and added memes, basically, to sections of that track, including a new movie, which I haven't watched yet. So work on getting emotional investment in your track. I know that is tricky these days because so much of the audience only wants to hear a few tropes. But what if you give them so many of those tropes and then a few other things that engage them? Not something else that just goes blah, 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 but something a little bit more thoughtful that goes, oh, I'm hearing some similarity, but oh my God, isn't that wonderful? Robert Miles's Children did a wonderful job of that. Everything was house music at the time. House, boring. It was all the same. But along came this guy who sadly never capitalized on it. He gave us this really wonderful little melody. And that piece was so incredibly successful. It was used on everything. It was overused, but that was because it was about the only thing out there that really had that engagement, and people didn't buy into it because of the rhythm, because they had that on everything. But there was a piece that sounded great. Same with the X-Files theme. That was a good little piece of music. It wasn't the greatest TV theme ever, but it was a good little piece of music and it worked. And it drew people in. So your leads, lots of movement, and don't necessarily set that movement in stone to say, every time it plays it's going to sound exactly the same. That can be fine, but move this around so that it plays differently every time. So that can be let's move our filter decay. Cool. Here how I can build in emphasis by just playing with a little bit more filter, but changing the decay on that filter really changes the feel. You can change your mix as well. So we could add a little bit more FM. We can automate our attack, so let's push our attack right up there and reduce it. A host of things that you can do to make that sound go from being a cube to being quite emotive. Now let's run through a couple of mistakes that I see people make. And I know people like to be sort of like, oh, Benny, why are you always telling us we're wrong? No, I'm just trying to help you not make the same mistakes over again. I'll just... Pretty basic sound. Cool. Happy with that. Now, here's the most common mistake people make. They get a sound, before they've even done anything with it, they go... Now, is that the sound the same as what we had before? I know some of you are going to say, oh, but it's better. Look straight away what happens sonically. I know you might initially be saying, oh, but it sounds bigger and wider, and oh, now I want to have sex and all of this. Remember, cut back. You're not about building huge fat sounds and then throwing them on the ground in a pile. You're about telling a story. And there are parts of the Taj Mahal that look like they're really big, and there are parts that are really kind of... And it's that balance of those parts. Some big and majestic and grand, and some small and pointy and feminine, that creates the beauty that is the Taj Mahal. So rather than saying, let's make every single sound wide out here and this much pitch variation and unison to the wazoo, this is a direct, intimate sound. Not to say that's a bad sound, but it's lost directness. You also might notice as soon as you start heavy chorusing, unisoning and what have you, that you appear to lose all your treble. You lose it all in phase cancellations as it evaporates, so you have to turn the treble up, which creates another impossible mix issue. So while unisons can be useful, don't grab them straight away. Focus on getting your part great. Then we can add a tiny bit. So we've taken our skinny guy, put him in a nice suit so he just looks a little manlier. But he's still one guy, not a host of like 50 million guys trying to run through the door at once and getting jammed. Focus on the one guy. So watch out for your unisons. The other one is watch out for your reverbs. I actually really like this little fella as a reverb. But see how we've again lost some focus on that sound. So your reverbs, keep them low. Even look at keeping them short. Or consider abandoning a fair amount of your reverb altogether and going into delays. Hear how that's given you a huge amount of stereo? Because we're working on, well, if we put it back in mono, straight down the center, because we've got a very monophonic sound here. Put them out into stereo. They're stereo, but the stereo is actually after the fact. So it's like we've let the guy through the little crack in the door, and then he expands as he comes into the room. Hey, hey! So consider careful use of things like delays, especially delays combined with modulation. So this fellow, like most delays, will allow you to modulate its delay. Not enough that you... But just that little bit is going to create space behind the sound, not with the sound. So your unison is a very easy way to say, oh, I'm going to create immense amount of width, and then I'm going to fill out my sound even more. But hear how we start to have some real limits with what we can do with this sound. To a great extent, we've stripped subtlety. How subtle can a mob of 200 people be? Generally not very at all. So, leads are commonly telling a subtle part of the story, in which case, allow them to be subtle. By all means, use a little bit of effects on them. but focus on those effects being quite subtle. And you're going to find that that works out so much nicer. The other thing that you can do, which is related to what I've been showing you above, you can do things like a little bit of FM in your sound, is to choose unusual processing. The usual processing is to whack a little bit of overdrive on it, or saturation, and that's fine. You're sparking up the sound, adding some non-linear excitement. By all means, go for it. But the modern tendency is to add a lot of wave shaping and distortion on your sound. The problem with distortion, like you heard in that bass from earlier, is that it just adds vast amounts of frequencies and fills up a space. So again, it's like trying to jam 200 people through a small doorway all at once, not allowing for them to come through one at a time, but all 200 at once. How many people get through the door? None. Maybe some of their farts get through, but they don't get through. So you've lost your effectiveness. Even though that sound is huge, 200 people often can't do as good a job as one guy who's got a good story to tell. So sometimes a little bit of subtlety. Oh, who made this? He must be a wonderfully good-looking fella. Sounds like a bad note. So something like ring modulation can be quite interesting because you can add a little bit of something which is different from the way you do it normally with a synth. With a synth, if we add something, even if we add ring modulation in here, oops, better turn that fella on. I'll just get rid of that. So turn that on. Hear how that doesn't sound the same as when we do it here. We can look at perhaps changing some of that by turning off keyboard. But it doesn't sound the same. So sometimes a little bit of outboard processing here and be subtle. Can add a lot of interest to an instrument. Here I've used a ring modulator. Now the thing with a ring modulator is that when you're using the inbuilt oscillator of a ring modulator, in this case, even though it says saw, it's a sine wave, we can turn it into a saw, is that we're not moving that wave. It's steady. It's not moving as we move the keys. So what it's adding to the waveform, the sound, is you can hear how surprisingly static that is. It changes based on what we're feeding it, but if you look at the wave, you see it's really staying in the same spot. So by adding just a wee bit of that, we're actually saying this instrument, no matter the range of notes it's playing, is a unique identity. One of the problems with pure synthesis is that each instrument doesn't necessarily become a unique identity, whereas this helps make them more of a unique identity. I have another video out there where I'm showing you the same process using a resonator, a kilohertz resonator, And I show you that on a piano sample set and how I make that sound more real or organic, and to create more of a unique character with a resonator. Here we're doing that with a ring modulator. When it's low in the mix, it can add something that's really wonderful. But there's no right or wrong. It's merely just a case of saying you don't always have to do things the way you think you're going to do them. That's just... Now here's the other thing we want to avoid doing, which is what I talked about before. We want to avoid putting so many effects on that we create a nasty noise, or a noise that's more of a pad sound. That's now become a pad sound. We don't want that when we're working with leads. Please don't assume that your pad sounds are leads or that your lead sounds are pads. If you choose to swap their role during the piece, by all means, but please at least be aware, okay, for a while there I had you up front, now you're going down back, and the other guy is going to come forward, which is why commonly in an orchestra, the guy who's playing a solo, he's become the lead. He'll stand up. It's not so much about so everyone can identify him and hand him flowers and ask to have his babies after the show. There's some of that. But a lot of it's about allowing him to become louder and clearer, and also providing a visual cue so people can say, the guy with the trumpet, he's standing up. And it says to people, focus your ears a little bit more on that trumpet dude and what the trumpet dude's doing, because this is where the story is at, where it's happening right now. That's why you rarely have two guys standing in the orchestra at once. There'll be one guy standing with the lead, or just different sections of the orchestra taking the lead role at that time. So just watch out as you're building sounds or as you're working with sounds, that you really understand the role they're playing now in this section. Is it a lead? Is it a pad? Is it a lead melody? Is it a counter melody? Or is it just harmony? What's the role of that? And then you're going to find that so much easier to mix, because you know what you need to highlight at any given point in time, what you need to make stand up. I think that covers about it. There's a lot you can do with leads. You can be very interesting. A fellow like Isao Tomita did very, very interesting works with morphing lead sounds in and out of noisy sounds. He was a master of, I believe, ring modulating sounds. So you'd have his melody be going through and they'd go at the other end. Listen to something like his version of The Planets. His feel for that was tremendous, but he was a good composer already. He did the original Kimber the White Lion, the Japanese version, not the American version. He knew what he was doing. He then applied that to a different sound set, which was a great big modulars. That's amazing work. Initially you'd be like, kind of strange, but you will also notice that there are a couple of key things that became big in synthesis, like the wub 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 thing. Tomita, I won't say he was the first guy doing, but he used it tremendously, very, very effectively, that something would be going along and then suddenly go wub 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 wub. He used LFOs, ring modulations and what have you to change the role of his leads, often in the middle of them playing, which was really, really fascinating. Not the thing that you have to do. I'm prone to doing some of it, so if you understand Tomita, you'll tend to go, I heard what you did there. The big takeaway I want you to have from this is remember that your leads are there to lead the story. So whatever you do, make sure that you're working your leads as hard as you can, not only just in pure sound creation, but in real sound and feel design. Not sound design, but feel design, by automating and moving them through time, changing them through time, with automating this and this, and definitely this and this. And then you're suddenly going to find that they go from being kind of flat and synthy to like really organic. They can still sound very, very synthy. So don't feel like I'm saying you have to give up your feeling of synthiness. Oh God, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll kill people before I do that. But you can make them feel super organic as a result. Good. Now, if you've watched this far, thank you very much. You're one of the 5 or 6%, or maybe 7% if we're on a good video, for actually following through. That makes you special. Feel good about that, because you know that 97% of the people who've started this program have not gotten this far. Most of them are gone within about a minute. So if you've watched what's probably an hour, good on you. This is really good news for you. If you've started to understand what I'm talking about, it's a lot more subtle. If you've started to understand it, good on you, because you've learned something that they haven't. The fact that you've got here means that I'll also make that offer to you. The offer is, and it's always there, the offer is, you can ask me questions. You can pop them down below in the box there, the reply thing, and say, hey Benedict, when you said this, what did you mean? Or ask me questions, I will answer them. Sometimes YouTube's not great at telling me there's a question there, but I look every few days, so I'll find it and I'll answer it as best I can. If there's a particular thing that you want me to cover, I ended up doing the wave shaping video, which I had no plans to do. That's in the last series on oscillator forms. I did that because one of my long-time Facebook or internet type friends, musical forum friends, asked me very directly, and it made me think, that's a truly interesting question. I don't think of doing it, but, and so it created a new video. I was able to answer his question through that and learn something myself. So feel free, seeing you're one of the special ones, to ask questions down below and even ask me to perhaps cover a subject for you. Thank you for your time and attention. You have a good day now, and happy leading.